Have you ever felt lost in a life that looks perfect from the outside? A good job, a nice home, and everything in place. Yet deep down, something feels missing. That's exactly how Leo felt. One sleepless night in London, he remembered a story his mother once told him about a quiet island in Greece where life moved slower, the sea sang you to sleep, and peace came naturally. That memory became a whisper, and that whisper became a journey. What started as a simple trip turned into something far deeper, a rediscovery of purpose, peace, and connection. He didn't just travel to a new place. He returned to the roots of who he truly was. This is the story of Leo's awakening, a story of stillness, simplicity, and a soul's return. The city never really sleeps, but tonight, neither did Leo. He lay in bed, eyes wide open, staring at the faint glow of the street lamp filtering through the blinds. Outside, the distant hum of traffic created a constant background rhythm. Cars passing, horns echoing off tall buildings, and the occasional howl of wind between the concrete corridors of London. Everything was in motion except his mind. That, strangely, was still, too still. Leo sat up slowly, sighing deeply. The clock beside him glowed 2:03 a.m. Another sleepless night. He walked over to the window, gently pulling back the curtain. The view was as it always had been, an ocean of glowing buildings, flickering streetlights, and occasional silhouettes walking hurriedly down the street. Yet tonight, it all looked unfamiliar, almost hollow. He pressed his forehead to the cool glass, whispering to himself, "Why can't I sleep?" But deep down, he knew the answer. It wasn't the noise. It wasn't caffeine. It wasn't even stress from work. It was a silence, a strange, unshakable emptiness inside him that had been growing for months. A whisper, faint and persistent, that reminded him something is missing. Leo worked a stable job at a respected tech company. His apartment was modern, neatly decorated, with every convenience he could ask for. He had friends, money, a gym membership, and a coffee shop that remembered his order. But something within him felt disoriented, not unhappy, just disconnected, almost as if he were floating slightly above his own life, watching himself go through the motions. Wake up, commute, work, scroll, sleep, repeat. The days bled together in a gray blur. He had everything, and yet something essential was missing. As he stood by the window, a childhood memory floated up from the depths of his mind, a memory of his mother telling him stories before bed. Not fairy tales, but real stories. Stories of a different life, her life, in a small village in Greece where she grew up. She used to describe the sound of the sea hitting the rocks at night, the smell of warm bread from the local bakery in the early mornings, the wind rustling through olive trees during long afternoon walks, the stillness, the slowness, the soulfulness. At the time, Leo didn't think much of it. But now, on this sleepless night, those memories felt like tiny lights flickering in a tunnel of noise. He could almost hear her voice again, soft, full of nostalgia, whispering stories of a land far away, but somehow familiar. He blinked. His heart tightened, not in sadness, but in yearning, a longing for something he never truly knew, yet somehow remembered. Leo slowly made his way to the bookshelf and pulled out an old photo album. He hadn't looked through it in years. Inside were pictures from his childhood, birthdays, beach days, school events, and tucked between the pages, a single faded photograph of his grandparents' home in Greece. A stone house on a hill, surrounded by wildflowers, overlooking the sea. His mother used to call it the heart of our family. Leo stared at the photo for a long time, tracing the outline of the mountains in the background. He imagined himself there, sitting on the porch, sipping strong coffee, listening to waves crashing in the distance. No alarms, no deadlines, just being. That was it. That was the whisper, the voice he'd been trying to ignore in the busyness of city life. The one that called not from outside, but from somewhere deep within. A soul memory, a call to return, not just to a place, but to a feeling, a rhythm, a truth. Back at the window, the night had deepened. The city lights flickered like distant stars. Yet Leo felt more awake than he had in months. Not because he couldn't sleep, but because something inside him had awakened. Maybe, just maybe, it was time for a change. Not just a vacation, not an escape, but a journey. A journey to the place his soul was remembering. A journey towards something real. A journey back to the roots. And with that thought, he finally closed his eyes. And for the first time in many nights, he slept. Deeply, peacefully, as if the wind from the Aegean had already found him. The next morning, Leo woke with a softness in his chest he hadn't felt in a long while. There was no rush, no blaring alarm, no wall of emails waiting on the other side of the screen. Just a quiet hum inside his heart, a gentle pull, still echoing from the night before. The whisper hadn't faded. In fact, it had grown stronger, clearer, more certain. It said go. By the end of that week, Leo had cleared his schedule. He called work, said he needed personal time. His voice trembled slightly, unsure how to explain the why, but his manager, to his surprise, didn't question it. "You've earned it," she said. "Do what you need to do." So he booked a one-way ticket to Greece. No grand plan, no tourist checklist, just a single photo of that house on the hill, tucked into his jacket pocket, and a deep sense that this was where he needed to go. The plane took off from the gray drizzle of London skies, slicing through thick clouds until it emerged into open blue. As the aircraft cruised high above Europe, Leo pressed his forehead to the cold window and watched the land drift beneath him. Endless patchworks of fields, rivers winding like silver threads, and tiny clusters of lights that looked like forgotten stars. He wondered what it would feel like to arrive in a place he'd never been, but one that his soul had always known. Somewhere below, the Aegean Sea shimmered, vast and blue like a story waiting to be told. Leo didn't choose a big city like Athens or a famous island like Santorini. He chose Seriphos, a quiet island his mother once mentioned during a bedtime story when he was a child. "People still hang laundry under olive trees there," she had said, "and the sea sings you to sleep." That's all Leo remembered, and somehow it was enough. When he stepped off the small ferry that carried him from the mainland, a warm breeze greeted him, salted and fragrant, carrying the scent of wild herbs and distant firewood. He felt the weight on his shoulders lift, just slightly. A taxi brought him high into the hills, through winding roads lined with stone walls and fig trees. Finally, they reached a small guest house, whitewashed walls, blue shutters, and a garden brimming with lemon trees and rosemary. The owners, Nico and Eleni, welcomed him as if they were expecting him all along. Their faces were soft, lined by time and sunlight, and their eyes sparkled with a quiet wisdom that didn't need words. "Room is simple," Eleni said, handing him an old brass key, "but it has good dreams." Leo smiled. He liked that. His room overlooked the sea. A tiny balcony, sheer white curtains fluttering in the wind, and just beyond, the great expanse of blue that stretched endlessly toward the horizon. He dropped his bag and stepped outside. The sun was beginning to lower in the sky, turning the ocean silver and the hills golden. Birds danced through olive branches. Distant church bells rang once, then faded into silence. Leo stood there a long time, breathing, watching, letting the moment arrive fully before him, without needing to capture it, explain it, or understand it. That evening, he wandered down a stone path into the village square. It was quiet, peaceful. Locals sat at wooden tables, sipping thick coffee, playing backgammon, or simply watching the sky turn from pink to indigo. A few nodded in greeting, no rush, no expectations. He found a small taverna and ordered a plate of grilled vegetables and a bowl of lentils with lemon. Everything tasted different here, slower, richer, more alive. He ate slowly, without checking his phone once. His shoulders relaxed. His mind grew quieter. The island was already working its magic. That night, back on the balcony, the stars came out in full. Leo wrapped himself in a light blanket and stared upward, not for answers, but just to feel small and infinite all at once. The waves crashed gently in the distance, rhythmic and comforting. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel lost. He didn't know exactly what he was looking for yet, but he knew he was in the right place to find it. And maybe that was enough. As the wind whispered softly through the lemon trees and the moon cast silver across the tiled rooftops, Leo drifted into sleep. Not the kind of sleep that comes from exhaustion, but the kind that comes from peace, from return, from listening to the whisper, and finally following it. Leo awoke the next morning to sunlight streaming in through the white curtains, swaying gently with the sea breeze. No alarm, no vibration of emails, just the soft rustle of lemon leaves outside his window and the sound of distant waves whispering against the rocks below. He lay in bed for a while, watching the ceiling, his body unusually light. For the first time in years, he hadn't dreamed of meetings, deadlines, or alarms. Instead, there was space. Space to breathe. Space to feel. Space to just be. After breakfast, a simple plate of olives, crusty bread, and sweet local honey, Leo wandered out of the guest house with no plan. There were no sights he felt rushed to see, no itinerary, no camera around his neck, only his senses to guide him. He walked slowly through the village's winding stone paths, each turn revealing a new texture of serenity. Flowering vines hanging lazily over whitewashed walls, cats napping in terracotta pots, grandmothers sweeping dust from their porches like they'd done every morning for decades. He greeted an old man sitting beneath an olive tree. The man smiled, tipped his hat, and said nothing. And that silence felt like a full conversation. There was something different about the way life moved here. It wasn't slow from laziness, but from intention. People didn't just move slower, they moved deeper. Every step, every sip, every smile carried meaning. Back in London, Leo had become so used to rushing from one thing to the next that he'd forgotten how to notice. He had forgotten how to feel the sun warming his face or how olive oil glistens just before it's poured onto bread. Here, nothing was rushed. And in that pace, he found peace. Later that day, Eleni invited him into the kitchen. "We're making fasolata today," she said, a traditional Greek bean soup. Leo hesitated. "I don't know how to cook." She chuckled. That's the best place to begin. He washed vegetables while she chopped herbs, the smell of rosemary and thyme filling the small sunlit space. She didn't measure. She didn't follow a recipe. She simply knew. Cooking is like dancing, she said. You don't always need to know the steps. You just need to feel the rhythm. He laughed, awkwardly slicing a carrot. Then I've got 2 left feet. But slowly, something shifted. The longer Leo stayed in the kitchen, the more his hands relaxed. The more his mind stopped trying to get it right. He listened to the way Eleni moved. How she touched the food like it was something sacred. How she paused between tasks, not out of laziness, but to taste, to breathe, to feel. That afternoon, they ate together on the terrace overlooking the sea. The soup was simple: beans, olive oil, tomatoes, a touch of lemon. But to Leo, it tasted like something much deeper. Like memory, like warmth, like home. As the sun dipped lower, Leo walked again, no destination in mind, only footsteps guided by instinct. He climbed a path that led to a small hill above the village. From there, he could see everything: the white rooftops of the homes, the shadows of olive groves dancing in the late light, and the sea beyond, stretching endlessly into blue. He sat down on a stone wall and closed his eyes. There was no music, no traffic, no voices, only the wind, the birds, and the deep silence within. And in that silence, Leo heard something he hadn't heard in years. His own breath, his own heartbeat, his own presence. He realized then that silence wasn't empty. It was full of life, of meaning, of answers he had forgotten how to listen for. That evening, as stars blinked softly above and the moon rose silver over the sea, Leo sat alone on his balcony. But he didn't feel lonely. Instead, he felt connected, not to anyone in particular, but to everything. To the olive trees, to the soup, to the breeze, to the rhythm of life itself. He whispered quietly to the night, "I didn't know I needed stillness until I found it." And the night, ever so softly, whispered back. That night, after another slow day of stillness and simple joys, Leo returned to his balcony. The stars were already awake, scattered across the dark velvet sky like ancient lanterns. A soft wind rustled through the lemon trees, and waves whispered in the distance like the lullaby of the earth itself. The village below was silent. The lamps along the narrow streets glowed faintly, flickering now and then like fireflies drifting through a dream. There was no noise, no urgency, just a sacred stillness that wrapped around him like a warm blanket. Leo sat with his feet up on the edge of the balcony, sipping a small glass of herbal tea Eleni had made with fresh mountain herbs. He breathed it in slowly: chamomile, mint, and something floral he couldn't quite name. It calmed his chest, softened his thoughts. For a while, he didn't think about anything. He simply watched the sky. Eventually, he drifted back inside, pulled a thin sheet over himself, and let the sea breeze continue to dance through the open window. And somewhere between the gentle rustle of trees and the hum of his own breath, sleep found him. In his dream, Leo stood in an open meadow surrounded by rolling green hills. The air was warm, the sky painted in soft oranges and purples, the kind of twilight that lingers long after the sun has set. Crickets sang their evening songs in the tall grass. A long wooden table stood in the middle of the field, covered in a white lace cloth. Twinkling lights dangled from trees overhead, swaying gently with the breeze. The table was filled with food, vibrant, colorful, and comforting. Dishes of roasted vegetables, fresh bread, bowls of olives, herbs, and simple but beautiful homemade meals. One by one, people began to arrive. Faces from his life, his mother, his sister, old friends, even Eleni and Nico from the guest house. Some he hadn't seen in years. Some he hadn't thought of in months. Some he couldn't quite recognize, but felt deeply connected to. They all sat at the table, smiling, laughing, passing food, raising glasses. And Leo stood at the head of it all, serving. With each plate he handed out, something inside him glowed. Not with pride, but with purpose. He wasn't the star of the night. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was simply sharing something from the heart. Something he had created. Something real. Something whole. And everyone around the table received it not just with smiles, but with deep gratitude. As if the food carried more than flavor. As if it carried meaning. Connection. Healing. Suddenly, Leo felt a warmth behind him. He turned. There, standing quietly in the shadows just beyond the glow of the lights, was his grandmother. Her hair tied back, a soft apron around her waist, hands folded gently. Her eyes were full of love and calm. The same eyes he remembered as a child. She didn't say anything. She just nodded. And somehow, in that small gesture, he understood everything. He understood why he had come, why the city felt so empty, why the whisper had called, and why this moment, this dream, was more than just sleep. It was a message. Leo woke with tears in his eyes, not of sadness, but of knowing, of clarity. Morning light filtered through the curtains, soft and golden. The sounds of roosters echoed in the distance. Birds chirped. A breeze danced across his face. But inside something had shifted. Something had awakened. He got up slowly, walked barefoot to the garden, and found Eleni watering herbs near the stone wall. She looked up, noticed his expression, and smiled. "Did you sleep well?" she asked. Leo nodded. "I had a dream. A good one." "Yes," he said quietly. "It told me why I'm here." Eleni didn't ask for more. She simply nodded and returned to her watering. Because sometimes dreams speak loudest when we let them linger in silence. Later that day, Leo returned to the kitchen and asked if he could help make lunch. This time, he didn't wait for permission. His hands moved with more confidence. His heart felt steady. The herbs smelled richer. The oil shimmered warmer. The sounds of chopping, stirring, sizzling, they were music now. Cooking wasn't a task anymore. It was a language, a prayer, a remembering. And though he didn't yet know where it would all lead, he knew one thing for certain. He had finally heard the message his soul had been trying to send him for a very, very long time. Leo's final morning on the island arrived quietly. The sun was still hiding behind the hills when he woke, but the sky had already begun its gentle shift from charcoal to lavender. The air was cool and still, holding the kind of silence that feels sacred, as though the world itself was pausing to say goodbye. He packed his few belongings slowly. A handful of clothes, a small notebook filled with thoughts and sketches, and a jar of dried herbs Eleni had given him the night before. "For the days when the city feels loud again," she had said. He smiled at that. Before heading to the port, Leo took one last walk. A final journey down his favorite mountain trail, the one that overlooked the sea. With each step, memories surfaced. The first olive tree he'd rested under, the garden where he learned to plant, the kitchen where his hands had begun to remember, the night he dreamt of the meadow and the table filled with people, and the morning he finally knew why he had come. He reached a quiet cave at the cliff's edge, a place he had visited many times during his stay. It was small, shaded, and opened up to a vast view of the horizon. Leo sat down on the stone, pulled his knees close, and simply watched. The sun finally broke over the edge of the sea, turning the sky gold, then peach, then a warm and glowing blue. The waves below sparkled like dancing glass, and the earth exhaled with the rhythm of a new day. Leo closed his eyes and whispered, "Thank you," not just to the land, but to himself, for listening, for following, for not turning away from the unknown. By afternoon, he was on a ferry, watching the island shrink slowly into the distance. The mountains grew smaller. The white homes along the hillside became tiny dots, and soon, all that remained was the outline of a memory, the shape of a place that had changed him in ways he didn't fully understand yet. But one thing was clear. He wasn't going back to the same life. He couldn't, because he wasn't the same person. Back in London, Leo moved in temporarily with his parents. His sister, still happily living in his old apartment, welcomed him with warmth and curiosity. "How was it?" she asked over dinner. Leo just smiled, then laughed softly. It felt like waking up. The first few days back were strange. Everything was faster, louder, brighter. But Leo didn't resist it. He observed it, calmly, patiently, like someone watching waves from the shore rather than being pulled under. Instead of rushing back to work, he took time to ground himself. He cooked. Every day, he returned to the kitchen not as a chore, but as a ritual. He prepared simple meals with meaning, lentil stews, roasted vegetables with lemon and thyme, chickpea salads drizzled in olive oil, and of course, dalmades and fava dip, two dishes he had perfected under Eleni's watchful eyes. His parents were amazed, not just by the food, but by him. He moved differently, slower, more deliberately. He smiled more, listened more, and most of all, he looked peaceful. One quiet evening, after serving dinner in the backyard under a string of lanterns, Leo sat with his notebook and wrote just 4 words. Roots and whispers, coming soon. He had finally found his direction. Leo enrolled in a part-time culinary course and began to sketch out a vision for a plant-based catering company inspired by his time in Greece. A business that wasn't just about food, but about connection, community, and the earth. He called it Roots and Whispers, a name that honored both the ancestral grounding he had rediscovered and the inner voice that had guided him back. At first, it was small. A few local events, dinner under the stars, farm-to-table meals for families and friends. But soon, word spread. People craved not just the food, but the feeling Leo brought with it. Calm, presence, care. One night, after his first large event, a countryside dinner with over 50 guests sitting beneath strings of lights, Leo stood quietly at the edge of the gathering. He listened to the laughter, the soft clinking of glasses, the music of conversation carried on the night breeze. And then, for just a moment, he closed his eyes, and he was back on that island, back in the meadow of his dream, back at the table, passing food, back in the silence that spoke everything. He opened his eyes, smiled to himself, and whispered, "This is it. This is home." If this story touched your heart, even in a small way, I invite you to take a deep breath, hold on to the stillness, and carry it with you. Sometimes, the quietest journeys lead us to the loudest truths. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video. It really helps others find these calming tales. Subscribe to the channel for more peaceful bedtime stories like this one. And let me know in the comments, where is your heart calling you to go? Until next time, sleep well, stay grounded, and keep listening to the whispers.